in psychological functioning, okay, um, it is one of the most important things that you can do in your life for your psyche, for your relationships, for your performance, for reaching your goals, for overcoming, you know, some kinds of depression, some kinds of anxieties, all of that. And this has been called a million different things. Um, but let me just put one out there, one phrase that's used a lot in literature, and that is the need or belief in the need for or the belief in a just world. Okay. The need for or belief in a just world. Now, what does that mean? It means that there are some people that have a huge, huge, huge drive for justice, that things should be this way and they ought to be that way and they should be that way. This that and when they're not, get out of the way, because every single thing is activated in them to make sure that somebody is brought to justice, and that's it. Okay, that's what we're talking about here. All right. Now, everyone has that. Okay. Every human has that. Every human has, as C.S. Lewis said, a sense of oughtness. The way that Lewis put it was, some people say they're tolerant. Well, they say they're tolerant and they don't think they have any expectations or rules, that they are judgment of other people. He said, well, go up and punch them in the nose and see if they don't have any sense that things ought not have happened, or you shouldn't have done that. Right. So that was C.S. Lewis's way of putting it. Basically, every system ever in the world, every philosophical system, the moral imperatives and all this stuff, there is a sense in humanity that we are born with, that there is a way that things ought to be. Okay, there's a way that things ought to be. Ought to be that way. The sun ought to come up, right? Well, a husband ought to love his wife, and a wife ought to love her husband, and parents ought to care about their kids. And, you know, bosses ought to be nice to people, and on and on and on and on and on. You're exactly right. And some people, I believe everybody has this, because you're created in the likeness of God, which part of God's nature, and then even later he gave us his laws, and as the scripture says, some people know the content and some other people just carry around inside. They just know it without even knowing it, right? That some things are just ought to be that way. We're born with this, and we protest when it's not like that. Go to any nursery in any hospital, and what you're going to see is the demand for a just world. A baby's going to come into the earth and go, this isn't how it ought to be. I shouldn't be here wet. Why should I be hungry? I just came from somewhere where it's like it. What is wrong with you people? Okay. Now that's expected and cute in a 3-day-old, and even for a while, and even for a while, and even for a while, right? Until it's not. Until they kind of are, maturing out of it. And we get to a place in this maturity cycle where we understand that the world is not like it ought to be. Sometimes mommy doesn't come right when I want her or she should. Sometimes, sometimes I'm walking along and and the sidewalk's not like it ought to be, and there's a bump and I trip on it and I skin my knee. Sometimes I go to the playground and some kid treats me like I shouldn't be treated. All right. And everybody knows when those things happen, something's wrong with that. That's not okay. And it is. Not it is okay. It is. It is. That's the way it is. Now I'm going to say that again because that's the essence of what I want you to hear today. We were created, and if you go to the Bible story about this, God created it all, and it was exactly like it ought to be. I mean, when was the last time you were naked and unashamed? Right? Well, go look in the mirror, and some of you can pull that off, but most of humanity would like to kind of make a few adjustments here and there. Everything was perfect. And not only that, he said, you're not even supposed to know what not perfect looks like. Why? Because you're not equipped to deal with it. And he said, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He's going, I don't want you to know what it feels like for somebody to treat you poorly. I don't want you to know what it feels like to suffer the consequences of you doing something you shouldn't do. I don't even go there, because part of that tree, as we know from the temptation, was the wish to be like God. Part of that, be the judge. I'm going to learn the wisdom of what's good and evil. I'm going to be the judge. See, and then we went into that I'm going to judge the universe mode, and we find ourselves, and here's your kicker, in a universe that you need for it to be good, and it's not all good. Bad things happen. Not only that, bad things happen to good people for no reason that they cause. That's not just. That's not fair. That's not right. That's not good. It is 100% like it should not be. All right. So where's the problem? That's the problem. But the bigger problem is when that reality exists, that my only option for a good relationship is with a person that is imperfect and will fail me, and their only shot at a good relationship is with me. Good luck on wanting a perfect relationship with me. I'm too dysfunctional for that. But somehow my wife has given up the demand for me to be perfect. And when I step on her toes, or, insensitive, or whatever it is I do, see, it's the acceptance and the skills and ability to deal with an imperfect world that make for maturity and success. Now, here's what makes for being stuck is the demand that it be just, and finding ourselves in the reality that it's not. So we're demanding something that will never be. And that keeps us blind to developing the acceptance and ability to deal with the world as we find it. And some people can't do that. When somebody fails them, somebody hurts them, somebody whatever, they get stuck in the protest of that grief cycle. I mean, grief has protests, and then you realize, I'm not going to get that. Whatever it is I wanted is dead. It's not going to happen. And then we go into the sadness, we grieve it, and we move on. So you may be stuck right now. And there's so many scenarios where this plays out. You are right to protest and be angry that things aren't the way that they ought to be. And sometimes your protest will lead to a resolution. Okay. That's what anger is for, is to tell us there's a problem, and it's to tell us to get moving on solving the problem. But sometimes that person's not going to change. They're not going to respond to your anger and hurt. They're not going to become mature. Okay. They're going to be who they are. So now what do I do? Well, I can stand there and be stuck as a victim of my demand for a dog to meow Or I can realize, okay, the dog's not going to meow. How do I deal with a dog? Maybe I mean, there's 1,000 different ways to deal with a dog, and frankly, enjoy them, unless maybe they're undealable. Maybe they bite. And so sometimes it's only when we realize no matter how much I nag them, they are going to bite. And then I can have the choice to protect myself well. So, what am I saying? I'm saying I don't want you to stay stuck in demanding that something be true that's never going to be true, or something be a certain way that's never going to be a certain way. Because what it'll do, it'll keep you stuck, it'll keep you angry, it'll keep you from grieving, it'll keep you from being healthy. But most of all, it'll keep you from seeing the options that are available to you to deal with that situation and maybe even turn it around, the options that are available other than the situation being like it ought to be. You got it? Sort of like, what if a surgeon opened me up and looked in there and said, "What? That appendix is not like you should be," and started yelling at my infection and demanding that it change, and demanding, instead of realizing, whoa, this is bad. What are my options? What can I do? And then we start to solve the problem. Okay, that will help. That'll help. If you make the shift from Genesis 1 to Genesis 3. Genesis 1 said God created the earth and everything is perfect. Genesis 3 said, oh crap, look what just happened. We lost the perfect world. Now, where do we find ourselves? And the rest of the story is about building and learning the ways to negotiate and deal with the coexistence of good and bad in ourselves and others and the world around us. And that includes forgiveness, it includes grief, it includes confronting things, it includes setting limits and boundaries, it includes building negotiating skills, it includes learning to be a redemptive force, it includes building people up, including ourselves, to where they actually can begin to act like they ought to act. It means containing some evil and locking it up so it can't infect. There are 1,000 different things that this story in the Bible takes us through to tell us, if you will accept it, that you live in an imperfect world. And don't worry about it, because one day he's going to return it to perfection. In this meantime, let's develop the skills and forgiveness and fortitude and perseverance and abilities to deal with the world as we find it, not like it ought to be. So let's give up our protests and roll up our sleeves. And you don't have the marriage that it ought to be, but let's deal with the one we got. And stop demanding that it ought to be something different, and let's make it something different.